It began in the dying light of a February evening, 1901. The town of Athens, Ohio, lay pressed between frozen hills, its chimneys coughing out smoke that clung to the slate-colored sky. The air was brittle with cold, the kind that crept into the bones and stayed there. The sun had gone early, leaving behind a pale horizon and a silence that seemed to stretch from one end of the valley to the other. Only the railroad remained alive, its thin iron veins humming faintly beneath the frost. Every day the trains came and went, carrying coal, mail, and the occasional traveler seeking warmer places. The people of Athens trusted the rails more than the roads. The dirt paths froze solid in winter and turned to rivers of mud in spring, but the tracks never changed. They cut through the world with straight, unbending certainty. That was why no one questioned the journey of the Midland Line. No. 47. It was a simple route, only 3 hours to Marietta, and it had never once been delayed. The station itself was small but proud, built of red brick and trimmed with soot. Its single platform stretched toward the darkness like an arm outstretched for something unseen. A yellow lantern glowed above the ticket window, painting the snow in a sickly hue. Inside, the smell of kerosene and damp wool filled the air. The station master, Elias Porter, sat at his desk, hunched over a ledger that seemed to weigh more than he did. He was a man of habit. Every night at 7, he recorded the departures and arrivals with the precision of a priest recording confessions. That evening, Elias paused between entries, rubbing his right eye. It had gone cloudy years ago after a mining accident, but he still refused to wear a patch. He claimed it let him see both sides of a thing, one clear, one hidden. As he waited for the whistle that would signal No. 47's arrival, he glanced toward the clock above the ticket window. The hand stood at 7:12. The train was due in 20 minutes. It was never late. Outside, the platform was nearly empty. Only 3 passengers waited in the cold. The first was a woman named Clara Henley, a schoolteacher from Nelsonville. She was in her early 30s, her hair pinned tight beneath a black bonnet. She held a carpetbag close to her chest and stared down the track as though expecting something to crawl out of the darkness. The second was a traveling preacher, Reverend Amos Heller, who carried with him a battered Bible and the smell of cheap whiskey. He smiled at anyone who met his gaze, though his eyes were pale and empty. The third was a man no one recognized, tall, dressed in a dark coat and bowler hat, his face sharp and bloodless, like it had been carved from wax. He did not speak. When Elias asked his name for the ticket ledger, he simply placed $2 on the counter and said, "Marietta." His voice was dry, brittle as ash. As the minutes passed, the air seemed to grow heavier. Snow began to fall slow, soundless. Flakes that caught in the lantern light and dissolved on the rails. The wind moved through the station, carrying with it a faint metallic scent, like blood or rust. Elias frowned and turned up the lamp. He didn't notice that the clock above him had stopped ticking. The second hand hung between marks, motionless. At precisely 7:32, the whistle sounded from the west. It was a long, low wail that seemed to shiver through the earth itself. The train emerged from the trees like a black serpent, its iron skin slick with frost. Steam hissed around the engine, and the number 47 glowed faintly on its side. Elias stepped onto the platform and lifted his lantern. The engine slowed, sparks scattering from its wheels. The conductor leaned out from the cabin, his breath white against the night air. Samuel Pike was his name. He was a tall man with a rough beard and the calm confidence of one who had spent half his life among the rails. In his vest pocket, he carried a silver watch, a gift from his late wife, engraved with the words, "Until we meet again." He checked the time as the train rolled to a stop and called out to Elias, "7:32 on the mark," he said. "A good omen." Elias nodded but said nothing. He had worked too long to believe in omens. Still, something about the air that night unsettled him. It felt thick, heavy, as though it carried a storm not of weather but of fate. The passengers boarded quietly. Clara took a seat near the middle of the car, clutching her bag. The preacher muttered to himself, flipping through his Bible with trembling fingers. The pale man sat in the last seat, his hat low over his eyes. None of them looked at one another. The train felt too still, too expectant. Even the usual hiss and rattle of the engine seemed. Before departure, Conductor Pike made his rounds, checking tickets and doors. When he reached the final car, he paused. The corridor lights flickered once, twice, and then steadied. For a moment, he thought he saw movement in the reflection of the window, a shadow standing behind him. But when he turned, the aisle was empty. He smiled faintly and muttered that he was tired. He had made the trip to Marietta 100 times. It was routine, safe, ordinary. At 7:39, Elias logged the final entry for the night. Train No. 47 departed Athens Station. Clear weather. 12 aboard. He underlined it twice, closed the ledger, and exhaled. The echo of the whistle lingered long after the train vanished into the trees. The station grew quiet again. Elias trimmed the lamp and prepared to lock up. But as he reached for his coat, he noticed the clock above the door. It had begun ticking once more, though the hands now pointed to 9:17. He frowned, tapping the glass, but the minute hand did not move. He made a note to fix it in the morning and stepped outside. The snow had stopped. The rails glimmered faintly under the moonlight, stretching away into the forest. Elias thought he saw a faint red glow at the horizon, as if the train's lantern were still burning far down the line. He watched until his breath turned to mist and vanished. Then he turned for home, leaving the empty station behind. Hours passed. Midnight came. In the town of Nelsonville, a farmer named Jonathan Baird awoke to the sound of a whistle echoing through the valley. It was faint, distant, but wrong. It seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere at once. His wife, still half asleep, whispered that no trains ran that late. Jonathan agreed. Yet he swore he could see a thin column of smoke rising from the woods beyond the river, lit by an unseen light. By dawn, Marietta Station reported a delay. No, 47 had not arrived. Telegraph messages crackled between stations. Athens confirmed departure. Marietta reported absence. The line in between 20 miles of rail and forest was silent. The crew of No. 12, traveling the opposite direction that night, said they never passed another engine. The rails were empty. Elias Porter received the telegram just after sunrise. He reread it twice, his fingers trembling. He looked down at his ledger, the last line still fresh, the ink still dark. For reasons he could not explain, he opened the book again and wrote beneath it, in smaller script, "No return." No sound. He stared at the words until they blurred. Later that day, a search party was organized. Men on horseback followed the rails, expecting to find a derailed engine or collapsed bridge. They found nothing. The snow bore no tracks, no sign of wreckage. Only at the mouth of Hocking Tunnel did they find something unusual, a faint burn along the stone, like soot, though no fire had been there. A lantern lay nearby, still warm to the touch. The wick glowed dimly, though no oil remained. Word spread quickly. Some said the train had vanished into the tunnel, swallowed whole. Others whispered that the pale man aboard was no man at all. A few recalled seeing strange lights in the hills the week before, hovering over the tracks like will-o'-wisps. But the railway officials dismissed it all as rumor. They promised to find the train within days. They never did. In the evenings that followed, Elias Porter found himself returning to the station long after dark. He said it was duty, but in truth, he could not sleep. Each night he opened his ledger and stared at the final entry. The ink had faded slightly, but the words still stood. Train No. 47 departed Athens Station, 7:32 p.m. clear weather. 12 aboard. Sometimes he thought the handwriting looked different, straighter, unfamiliar, as if written by another hand. Once, he swore he heard the faint ticking of a watch somewhere in the room, though his own had long since broken. The following week, another message came from Marietta. The rails near Hocking Tunnel were being inspected. The telegraph line beyond it had gone dead. Elias sent a reply, but the wire crackled and hissed, as though the current itself resisted the words. When he stepped outside, the air felt colder than it should have been. The snow was melting in town, but the rails gleamed with frost. That night, a boy named Edwin Latimer claimed he saw a train pass through the valley. He told his father it made no sound, no smoke, only light. His father scolded him for lying, but Edwin insisted. He said he saw faces in the windows, pale faces, staring straight ahead. The next day, the boy's footprints were found near the track, leading toward the tunnel, and stopping abruptly in the snow. Elias did not tell anyone about the dream he had that same night. In it, he stood on the platform alone. The clock read 9:17. A whistle sounded in the distance, low and mournful. The train arrived, but no one disembarked. Through the fogged windows he saw only shadows, 12 of them, motionless. One of them raised a hand, pointing at him. He woke before it reached the platform dot when morning came. He opened his ledger once more and found a new entry written beneath the others. Arrival confirmed. The handwriting was not his own. He tore out the page and burned it in his stove. But the next night, the words returned, rewritten as if by invisible hands. Arrival confirmed. He stopped burning them after that. Some things, he decided, did not want to be erased. For weeks afterward, the people of Athens avoided the station. The train still ran those that remained, but few were brave enough to travel after sunset. The wind that blew through the valley carried a strange sound, like a whistle played backward. And sometimes, when the air was still, the rails themselves seemed to hum beneath the snow, faint but alive. Elias Porter continued his work in silence. He no longer trusted clocks. He no longer slept. Each night he wrote the same line in his ledger. As if compelled by something unseen, Train No. 47 departed Athens Station. 7:32 p.m. Each morning he found the ink smeared, as though someone had dragged their fingers through it. Once he saw a single fingerprint in the margin, long, thin, darker than ink. He began to believe that the train had never truly left Athens, that it circled the valley still, lost between stations, repeating the same journey without end. He tried to tell the railway officials, but they laughed. They said he had been too long at his post. They said trains do not vanish. But Elias knew better. Some departures were not departures at all. They were openings, and so as February turned to March, the legend of the missing train began. It was whispered in mining camps and taverns, in letters and sermons. The people called it the Ghost Line, though Elias preferred another name. He called it the Return, because every night, just past 9:17, he swore he could hear the faint rhythm of wheels on steel, moving through the dark toward a station that no longer waited for them. He never spoke of what he, Juanto, saw one evening near the end of winter. The moon was high, the tracks glimmered like silver. He stood alone at the platform, the cold cutting through his coat. And there, far down the line, he saw a light approaching, soft, steady, the shape of a lantern swinging from the front of an invisible engine. It came closer, brighter, until he could see his own reflection in it. And then it stopped, a few yards away. He waited for a sound, but there was none. Only silence, vast and perfect. When he looked again, the light was gone. Elias Porter did not return to the station after that night. His ledger remained on the desk, open to the last line. It read simply, "Departure observed. Return pending." The Hocking Tunnel was a mile-long scar through the hills, carved by sweat, dynamite, and death, the miners who cut it in the 1860 said they could hear voices in the rock, low murmurs that rose with the strike of each pickaxe. 2. Men were buried alive when the ceiling collapsed during its final days of excavation, and the others refused to finish the job until the company priest came to bless the walls. Even then, they said the blessing didn't take. No bird ever flew near its mouth, and the air within stayed damp and cold, even in summer. By 1901, the tunnel had already earned its local name, the Black Mouth. Every child in Athens County knew the stories: the brakeman who walked in and never came out, the engineer who heard a second whistle behind his own. But the Midland Line didn't believe in superstition. The timetable demanded precision, and the tunnel was simply another part of the route. On the night of February 12th, the train known as No. 47 entered that tunnel and, according to every record, never emerged. At first, all seemed ordinary. The engine's glow filled the mouth of the passage, throwing long shadows over the frost. The whistle echoed off the rock, multiplying itself until it became a choir of mechanical howls. The passengers leaned closer to the windows, watching the walls slide past, stone black as ink, glistening like wet coal. Conductor Pike moved through the cars, checking that the lamps were steady. The preacher nodded to him, murmuring a psalm about deliverance through darkness. Clara Henley sat stiffly, her gloved hands folded over her bag. In her mind, she repeated the letter she had written that morning when she meant to deliver in Marietta. It was addressed to her brother, who had not written in years. She would never know that the letter was later found unopened, still in her bag, its ink smudged as if it had been written underwater. The pale man at the back of the car did not move, his head tilted slightly, as though listening to something beneath the rumble of the wheels. When the train entered the deepest part of the tunnel, the lamplight dimmed. Pike felt at first a pressure in his ears, like a storm drawing near. He glanced toward the window and realized he could no longer see the walls. The glass reflected only his own face, and behind it, darkness thick enough to breathe. He checked his watch. 7:58. They should have been halfway through, yet something was wrong. The rhythm of the engine had changed, not a chug, but a heartbeat, deep and uneven. He moved to the front car to speak with the engineer, Thomas Marin. But the corridor seemed longer than it should have been. The light at the far end flickered, stretched, and then snapped out. When he reached the engine, Marin was gripping the throttle with both hands. His face was slick with sweat despite the cold. The gauge needles trembled wildly. The flame in the furnace burned greenish white, and the air smelled not of coal but of damp soil. Pike shouted above the roar, asking what was wrong. Marin only whispered, "The track's gone." Pike stared through the windshield. The tunnel walls had vanished. In their place was a haze-rolling black mist that shimmered with faint light. No stars, no ground. Just endless depth, like they were moving through a great hollow. He reached for the brake, but the lever resisted, cold and solid as stone. Marin's eyes rolled back. He began muttering names under his breath, 12 of them, one after another. Pike recognized some from the passenger list. When the last name passed Marin's lips, the whistle screamed, long and human. Then everything went quiet. The passengers felt it too. The preacher dropped his Bible, the pages fluttering though there was no wind. Clara Henley pressed her hand against the glass and felt it tremble, not from motion but from something outside, like a hand brushing against it. She turned to speak to the man across from her, but he was gone. Only his hat remained on the seat, wet with something dark. The pale man stood then, moving slowly, almost reverently, toward the center of the car. His coat hung loose, his shadow twisting on the wall as if detached from him. He placed one hand on the brass rail and said quietly, "You'll need to be still when it happens." Clara's voice caught in her throat. "When what happens?" He smiled without warmth. "The change." At that moment, the train gave a single violent lurch. The lamps went out. In the dark, a sound rose, not metal, not wind, but whispering. Hundreds of voices, soft and urgent, murmuring prayers and pleas. The air grew colder until Clara's breath hung white before her face. Someone screamed. Short and sharp. Then silence again. When the lights flickered back, half the seats were empty. The preacher sat frozen, eyes wide, lips moving soundlessly. Clara looked to the back. No pale man, only a faint mark on the floor, as though frost had burned the wood. The conductor stumbled through the aisle, face pale. He asked if anyone was hurt, but no one answered. Outside the windows, faint lights floated in the dark, pale, flickering shapes that kept pace with the train. They moved like people walking alongside, their faces indistinct, their mouths opening and closing in silent speech. He looked down at his watch. The hands spun rapidly, first forward, then backward, until they stopped at 9:17. The second hand ticked once, then froze. He slipped it into his pocket, heart pounding. He didn't know how long they rode like that. Time dissolved. Every few minutes or maybe hours the lamps dimmed and flared, revealing fewer passengers each time. He thought of stopping the train, but the levers no longer responded. The engine pulsed on its own, breathing, drawing them deeper into the dark. When investigators came days later, they found the tunnel quiet and whole. No marks on the walls, no rails out of place. They walked its full length by lamplight and emerged on the far side untouched. But a few reported strange sensations, echoes of footsteps behind them, or the faint smell of hot metal. One inspector, Henry Dobbins, refused to re-enter after hearing what he called breathing in the stone. 2 weeks later, he was confined to the Athens Asylum for hysteria. From there he wrote a single letter before he lost the ability to speak. "We opened the tunnel again last night. It was longer. We walked for an hour and saw no end. The air was alive like lungs." Elias Porter, still keeping watch at Athens Station, began to dream again. He saw the tunnel, the smoke, the endless dark. In every dream, he stood at the entrance with his lantern raised, and from the shadows he heard footsteps approaching. 12 sets at first, then 11, then only 1. When he woke, his bedsheets were damp, as though he had been standing in rain. He started receiving letters with no return address, short notes, written in a slanted hand. The first read, "We are through. All is light here. The clock holds still." The second, "Tell them the watch keeps good time." The third contained nothing but a single pressed snowflake. Still cold. He burned it, but the ashes never cooled. One morning, the telegraph operator called him over. A message had come through, faint and broken. Only fragments could be read. No 47 arriving. 9:17. All present. Repeating. The operator assumed it was a misfire, a crossed signal from another line. But the message continued to repeat every night for a week. At exactly 9:17. Each time, the words grew clearer, until finally the machine fell silent and refused to work. Again, Elias stopped going home after that. He slept in the station, near the ledger, keeping the lamps low. Each night he opened the book to the same page, tracing the entry with his finger. Sometimes, he swore he could feel the faint vibration of passing wheels beneath the floorboards. He would look up, expecting to see headlights through the window. But there was only darkness and the reflection of his own tired eyes. He began to write in the margins, "If they return, I must see them. Light seen beyond the trees." The whistle sounds nearer. The handwriting grew worse with each entry, until it slanted sideways like the writing of a man writing in motion. In late February, 2 boys exploring near the tunnel reported seeing a figure by the blocked entrance. They said it was a man in a conductor's coat, holding a lantern that gave off no light. When they called out, he turned, but his face was blank, featureless, like the smooth porcelain of a mask. He raised one hand as if to wave, and then faded back into the concrete wall. The boys were whipped for lying. But their father later found the boy's pocket watch had stopped frozen at 9:17. The railroad company sent one last team to investigate. Among them was an engineer named Russell Crane, who had known Samuel Pike personally. He entered the tunnel with a notebook, a hammer, and a single lantern. He was gone an hour. When he returned, his beard was white, though it had been brown that morning. He refused to speak. But in his notebook he had written 3 words, each underlined: "They are waiting." He died a week later, his watch still ticking backward. No 47 was officially declared lost in March of. At first, Robert felt only pride in his new post. He was 23, ambitious, fond of order and timetables. The silence of the depot suited him. But by the second week, he began to notice oddities. The clock on the wall lost minutes at night and regained them by morning. Telegraph wires that should have been still would twitch as if touched by unseen hands. Sometimes, in the moments before sleep, he thought he heard the faint hum of an engine far off in the hills. He told himself it was the wind. One evening, just after sunset, a stranger arrived at the platform. He wore a long gray coat and carried no luggage. His shoes were covered in black dust, the kind found only along the old railbeds. When Robert asked his destination, the man answered Marietta and placed 2 coins on the counter, both tarnished, both dated 1901. Robert hesitated, then said the line to Marietta was closed. The man frowned as though confused. "The 47 still runs," he said softly. "I heard its whistle not 2 nights past." Robert laughed, but uneasily. "No trains come through here in 3 years," he said. The man smiled faintly, as though humoring a child. "Then perhaps it's only late." He turned and walked out into the snow. His footprints led down the track, toward the woods, and stopped 50 feet later, as if he had stepped into the air. Robert never saw him again. The next morning, a letter arrived for Elias Porter, though the man had been dead 2 years. It bore no return address, only a single seal pressed into black wax, an image of a wheel surrounded by wings. Inside, written in neat cursive, were just 4 words: "The line is open." Robert burned the letter, but the ash would not scatter. It clung to his hands like soot. That summer, the children of Athens began to tell stories again. They said if you placed your ear to the rails at night, you could hear the clatter of wheels, far away but moving fast. They said the train was coming back, bringing something with it. Adults scolded them for nonsense, but a few of the older miners began to avoid the tracks after dark. A superstition spread quietly: no one should stand on the rails after 9 p.m., lest the ground start to tremble. By August, the telegraph lines along the route began to malfunction. Messages sent from Athens to Marietta arrived garbled, the words repeating themselves or reversing in order. One operator reported receiving the same message for 3 consecutive nights, though no one had transmitted it. "We are delayed but unbroken." He quit his post soon after. Then came the sighting. A farmer named Thomas Leach was driving his wagon home from town when he noticed light along the horizon, a faint golden glow moving parallel to the hills. At first, he thought it was lightning, but the light remained steady, and soon he could hear what sounded like the low rhythm of steel wheels. He stopped his horse and listened. The sound grew clearer, closer, until it seemed to pass directly beneath him. Yet the ground did not shake. The rails nearby lay rusted and still. Leach told his story at the tavern the next day. No one believed him until he pulled a lump of twisted metal from his coat pocket, small, perfectly round, like the edge of a burned coin. He said he found it lying in the snow, glowing faintly in the dark. When he returned home that night, the metal was gone, leaving a black ring on his palm that no washing could remove. In October, Robert Ann began keeping his own ledger. The old one, Elias Porter's, had gone missing sometime in the summer. He suspected the janitor, or perhaps one of the curious railwaymen who liked to poke through forgotten files. Yet some nights he thought he heard the sound of pages turning in the office while he was alone, a faint rustle like paper stirred by breath. His first entry read simply, "Whistle heard again, westbound." Time uncertain. He recorded each incident with care. Strange lights, unexplained signals, missing letters. Always the same hour between 9 and 10. And always the same direction west to east, as though something were returning. One night he stayed late at his desk, determined to witness whatever haunted the line. The lamps burned low, the telegraph silent. Outside, snow had begun to fall, muffling every sound. Just before 9, the clock on the wall stopped. The silence deepened. For a moment, he thought he heard footsteps on the platform. He stood, heart pounding, and went to the door. A figure stood in the snow, a woman in a long coat, her hair dark and wet. She looked about 30, her expression distant. Robert asked if she needed shelter, but she did not answer. She pointed instead toward the tracks, where a faint glow flickered between the trees. "The train," she said softly. "It's early tonight." Before he could speak again, she was gone. Only her footprints remained, leading to the edge of the platform and no farther. Robert's hand shook as he wrote the next entry. Saw her. Clara Henley alive. But Clara Henley had been among the 12 passengers of No. 47. The following days, blurred together. The snow thickened and the air grew sharp. Robert barely slept. He sat in the station each night, waiting. The sound returned again on the 12th of November, a low, rhythmic pounding, distant but deliberate. The rails began to hum beneath his feet. He raised his lamp and stared down the line. There it was, a light in the darkness, white and steady, moving toward the station. He felt no fear, only awe. The glow grew larger, brighter, until the outline of an engine took shape black iron, glinting with frost. The number 47 gleamed on its side. He could see figures inside, silhouettes behind the glass. The train slowed as it reached the platform, its brakes sighing softly. And then, without a sound, it stopped. He waited for the door to open. None did. The windows were fogged, but behind them he thought he saw faces pale, motionless, eyes fixed straight ahead. He stepped closer. The metal of the car was cold enough to burn his skin, inside the front cab. Someone was moving a tall man with a conductor's hat. The man turned toward him slowly. His face was calm, almost kind, though the eyes were dark and hollow. He raised one hand, and Robert saw the silver watch glinting in his palm. The man mouthed something, but no sound came. Robert leaned in, trying to hear, and then, as suddenly as it had appeared, the train was gone. No sound, no smoke, only the smell of burnt coal and frost. The lantern in Robert's hand flickered and died. He woke hours later on the platform, snow covering his coat. The station clock read 9:17. His ledger lay open beside him. The page had changed. Beneath his last entry, in unfamiliar handwriting, were 6 words. Do not wait for its return. He closed the book and locked it away, but the words burned in his mind. By winter, rumors had spread again. Miners claimed to hear singing in the hills at night, soft hymns carried on the wind. A postmaster in Nelsonville found a mail sack buried in the snow. The letters inside dated 1901. The ink had not faded. A hunter near Hocking Tunnel swore he saw a light inside the sealed entrance, flickering as though a lantern moved behind the stone. When he pressed his ear against the wall, he heard the echo of voices counting 12 in unison. Then silenced out in February 1904, a man named Henry Dobbins escaped from the asylum in Athens. He had been one of the inspectors who entered the tunnel years earlier. They found him 2 days later by the riverbank, soaked and shaking, clutching a fragment of railway steel. On it, scratched with a nail, were the words, "Still moving. Still here." He died before dawn, Robert N. Resigned from the railway in 1905. The company offered him another post in Columbus, but he declined. Before leaving, he gave the station keys to a new clerk and told him to keep the lamps burning, even when the depot was empty. When asked why, he said, "It's best they see the light when they pass." He boarded a train north and was never heard from again. The ledger he left behind was found years later in a storage room beneath the depot. Most of its pages were blank, but one stood out. It was covered in two distinct handwritings, Robert's and another, shakier script that overlapped his. The entry read, "Train number 47 arrived. 9:17 p.m., departure unknown. The line remains open." The ink had soaked through the paper. As though the words themselves refused to dry, time moved on. The depot fell silent. Dust gathered on the rails, and the hills swallowed the old paths. Yet on certain nights, the air would still carry a faint, familiar sound, steel striking steel, wheels turning where no wheels should be. Travelers passing through Athens sometimes stopped to ask about it, and the locals would simply shake their heads. "There's no train here," they'd say. "Not anymore." But when they spoke, their eyes would always shift to the west dot, because everyone in Athens knew the train that never arrived was still out there, somewhere in the dark, circling, waiting, forever bound to the hour it was lost. And though the world forgot its name, the valley did not dot it, remembered the sound, dot it, remembered the cold. And when the wind blew just right, it carried with it a single whisper through the trees, low, mournful, and certain, all aboard. By the time 2 decades had passed, the Midland line was a memory, and the valley around Athens had sunk back into its own silence. Trees grew where the tracks once cut, and the station became a warehouse for grain and dust. Only a few old men still spoke of No. 47, and they did so with the reluctance of men who had learned that some stories do not wish to end. In 1919, a young historian from Columbus University arrived in town. His name was Lawrence Verriel, thin as a reed, always carrying a leather satchel and a portable camera. He had come to collect folk tales from the Appalachian region for a study on industrial superstitions. Most of his subjects spoke of ghost lights, headless miners, and river serpents. But one story kept returning to him again and again from the lips of different people in different towns. The train that vanished between Athens and Marietta. At first he treated it as a quaint myth, a parable of progress and punishment. But when he visited the Athens depot and found the old ledger preserved in a dusty cabinet, something shifted. The book was worn thin as cloth, its edges crumbled, yet the entries for 1901 ring dark and sharp, as though the ink had never dried. The final line, train No. 47 arrived. No one aboard. Sent a small cold wind through him. He copied the text carefully and decided to trace every record he could find. For months, he searched through county archives and railway logs. He found the initial reports of the search party, the telegram threads, the insurance statements. Every document ended abruptly around March 1901, as if someone had closed a book mid-sentence. There was no official account of wreckage, no death certificates for the missing crew, not even a formal announcement of closure for the Hocking Tunnel. The state records jumped from under inspection to line discontinued in a single line. It was a void on paper, a gap where reality should have been. Verriel followed the rails on foot where he could, marking distances and taking photographs. Most of the track had been pulled up, but sometimes he would find a bent spike or a section of iron grown into a tree. Local children followed him at a distance, throwing stones and calling him Professor Ghost. At night he camped by the river, listening to the wind that moved like breathing through the trees. Twice he woke to the sound of a whistle far away, a long mournful note that hung in the air and then died without echo. On his 7th day, he reached the site of the tunnel. The entrance was sealed by a slab of concrete stained with rust and lichen. Above it, someone had chiseled a warning in the stone: "Do not open what sleeps." Verril knelt and brushed away the moss. The air seeping through the cracks was cold and damp. Smelling of wet iron, he held a match close and saw that tiny beads of moisture formed on the wall and then receded as if drawn back inside by breath. He returned to Athens that night and wrote his notes by lamplight. There is movement behind the seal. Not sound, not light, but a feeling, a pulse. If stone can dream, this one does. He sent the pages to his mentor in Columbus, along with the photographs. Only one print ever came through the post. It showed the tunnel in daylight, the trees bent away from the opening as though leaning from a heat they could not see. At the bottom edge of the photo, blurred almost to nothing, was the shape of a figure standing to one side tall in a conductor's coat. Months passed. Then letters from Lawrence Verril stopped. When a concerned professor came to inquire, the local sheriff showed him Verril's abandoned room above the general store. The bed was unmade, the lamp burned to a nipple of wax. On the desk lay his notebook, open to a page half filled with writing. Asterisk. I heard them call in names from the dark. I counted 11. The 12th is mine. Beneath it someone had drawn a small circle of ink, ringed with 12 ticks like a clock face. The ink was still wet. After that, no trace of him was found. Only his camera remained. The film inside melted. Into silver dust. In 1923, a series of letters surfaced in the archives of the railway's insurance office. They were written by a clerk named Harrison Bloom, who had been tasked with clearing out old files from the Athens branch. He claimed to have discovered an unlabeled crate filled with items confiscated after the disappearance, pieces of charred timber, a lantern without glass, and a stack of envelopes never delivered. Inside one was a receipt book for the rail company. Its pages listing the 12 passengers aboard, no 47. Every seventh name was crossed out in red ink. Bloom sent the documents to his superior in Cincinnati with a note. The ledger does not agree with the public record. There were not 12 tickets sold. There were 13. The file was sealed the same year and has never been recovered. By the late 1920s, the story of the ghost train had become a regional legend. Writers and spiritualists visited the site, holding seances on the overgrown track bed. They spoke of echoes, of voices that answered questions no one had asked. One medium collapsed after crying out, "I see them walking in circles," each with a light in hand but no shadow beneath their feet. She was taken back to Columbus and never spoke again. A retired engineer named Russell Crane, one of the last living employees who had worked on the line, agreed to be interviewed by a local reporter. He had gone white-haired overnight after entering the tunnel in 1901, and for years he refused to say why. The reporter's notes survived, scrawled in the margin of a newspaper proof. He says there was no wall in there, only the inside of something alive. The following spring, the river that ran through Athens flooded its banks and exposed a section of buried track near the old junction. Workers sent to clear it found iron rails twisted together like braids and a set of boots standing upright with no body inside them. In the mud beside the rails was a fragment of wood with a number painted, in white, 47. The county sheriff ordered the site filled in again. He told the press it was only a washed-out bridge abutment. But the workers who had handled the timbers refused to return to the valley. One of them, a boy of 19 named Caleb Mott, was heard muttering to himself for weeks after. When asked what he'd seen, he said, "The wood was new. It smelled of smoke, not rot." He left town and was last seen walking along the railway bed at dusk. A lantern in hand. In 1934, a set of old tapes was found in the university. Archives wax cylinders labeled Verril Field Recordings. Most contained hymns and folk songs, but one bore no title. When played, it carried a low rumble and a faint metallic rhythm, as though recorded beside a passing engine. At the end, a voice could be heard whispering 3 times, "Marietta, Marietta, Marietta." The Curator who played it claimed the sound continued for several seconds after the cylinder was removed from the machine. The recording was misplaced within a month. By mid-century, the rail bed had been converted into a logging road. Trucks avoided the section near the old tunnel because their engines stalled without reason. At night, drivers reported seeing a glow beneath the ground, moving slowly east to west. Local authorities sealed the area again in 1952, pouring a second layer of concrete over the first. It cracked within a year. The legend was studied by folklorists and dismissed by skeptics. But every 20 years or so, someone would vanish near the valley: a photographer, a hobo, a pair of college students daring each other to knock on the gate. No bodies were ever found, only their footprints leading to the wall and ending there. In 1971, the State Historical Society attempted to digitize the old railway records. During the transfer, a technician named Eleanor Witt reported a fault in the scanner. The images of the ledger from 1901 appeared blank until she inverted the colors. Then words emerged in pale lines like photographic negatives. "We ride until the hour turns." The hour does not turn. She showed the supervisor, but when they rescanned the page, the text was gone. The machine failed that same day. Eleanor left the project and moved out of state. Before she died years later, she sent a letter to her daughter describing the dream she had each February: a station covered in frost, a man with a watch, a voice saying, "Until we meet again." Now a century has passed, and the rails are buried beneath grass and memory. Yet sometimes, after midnight, a thin silver fog rises from the valley and moves against the wind. Hikers speak of hearing distant bells and the creak of iron under their feet. Farmers wake to find lines drawn through their fields where nothing grows, as straight as laid track. Archivists still receive copies of letters signed with names long dead. The postmarks bear no date, only the number 9 and the mark of a clock hand pointing to 17. The letters contain no message, only a single phrase repeated in different hands. The line remains open. When the curious ask to see the original ledger, the curator takes them to a locked cabinet in the back room of the Athens Museum. He opens it slowly, careful not to touch the pages with bare skin. The ink still gleams faintly blue. If you listen closely, you might hear the faintest tick, like a watch buried somewhere deep inside the binding. When you turn to the last page, you will see the words that close the book and open everything else. Return logged. Line completed. 12 remain. Below the line there is no signature, only the faint imprint of a thumb pressed in black ink, elongated, like something that was never quite human. The curator says the page was blank when the ledger first came into his care. He does not open it anymore. He keeps it sealed in glass and tells visitors it is only an exhibit, though at night he hears the glass case tremble as if a heavy vehicle were passing far below the floor. That winter, a group of graduate students from Columbus petitioned to re-examine the tunnel for a new documentary. They came with cameras, lanterns, and a generator. The concrete seal was still intact, though fissured with age. They set their lights along the slope and recorded an introduction, the story of the lost train, the folklore, the fear. Then the power flickered. The camera stuttered once, capturing a single distorted frame. Later, when the footage was developed, that frame showed the students standing in front of the sealed tunnel, only there were 13 figures, not 6. The 7th from the left wore a conductor's hat. The group abandoned the project. One of them, a woman named Vera Sloan, moved to Florida and refused interviews. The others denied anything unusual. The reel disappeared from the university archive within a year. During the Depression, a handful of homeless men used the abandoned depot for shelter. They built fires in barrels and slept among crates of rusting nails. Most of them left after a few nights. One, an old veteran called Harmon, stayed through the winter. In a letter to a mission in Cincinnati, he wrote, It ain't the cold that keeps you awake. It's the rails under the floor. They hum. Sometimes it sounds like people talking low, like they're arguing which way to go. The mission received no further letters. In spring, a maintenance crew found Harmon's blanket folded on the platform and a circle of soot. Where his bed had been dot by mid-century, the legend had crossed from rumor to folklore. It appeared in pamphlets about haunted Ohio, in dime magazines, even in a radio play called Midnight Express. Yet all the dramatizations changed the details, different dates, different towns, always a hero who survived. Only the people of Athens still told it the old way. 12 aboard, 1 vanished train. And a whistle that marked 9:17. Some of the old miners still living in the hills claimed that every few years, the ground trembled as though something enormous passed beneath it. Once, after a storm, a section of track surfaced near the river, shining clean as new iron, though it had been buried 40 years. The sheriff ordered it removed and dumped in the water. A week later, the river ran black with oil for a day, and dead fish floated to the banks in neat rows, their bodies lined with soot. In 1962, the state authorized the construction of a new highway that would cut directly across the valley. Excavators reached the ridge above the sealed tunnel, and workers began blasting through rock. 2 days later, all machinery stopped at once. Not stalled dead, as if the current had been swallowed. When the engineers tested the ground, they found magnetism strong enough to spin a compass. The crew foreman, irritated, struck the ground with his shovel. The earth gave a hollow ring. They cleared the soil and found a length of polished steel curving toward the North Railroad track, buried but uncorroded, still warm to the touch. When they dug deeper, they uncovered more rails, crossing one another in impossible patterns, spiraling downward until they vanished into dark clay. The highway plans were altered. The official reason cited unstable subsurface conditions. Unofficially, every worker signed a non-disclosure agreement and was paid double. None of them returned to the site. The years passed. Athens grew quiet again, content to let the valley sleep. The depot collapsed in a storm and was left to rot. Yet in 1979, a volunteer firefighter discovered something during a brush burn. A metal box, warped by heat, half buried in the mud where the office once stood. Inside were charred papers, several coins, and a photograph. The photograph was of the old station platform, taken at night. A faint haze obscured the lamps, but the focus was clear on one figure at the edge of the frame, a man standing near the track, lantern raised. His face was turned away, but the silver chain of a pocket watch glimmered against his coat. On the back of the photo, written in faded ink, were the words, "Taken upon arrival." The firefighter kept it in his wallet for years. Though he claimed the image changed each time he looked at it. Sometimes the man faced the camera. Sometimes the train behind him seemed to move. After he died, the photograph went missing from his belongings. In the late 1980s, the property above the tunnel was sold to a mining company. They drilled a test shaft less than 50 yards from the sealed entrance. On the third day, the drill struck something that wasn't stone. The men reported a loud metallic clang that echoed for nearly a minute. When they pulled the bit up, the metal was bent and the end blackened, as though it had touched a live wire. A foreman lowered a microphone into the hole. The tape recording captured a continuous rhythmic sound like the slow turn of wheels, and beneath it, faint human voices counting. The count reached 12, then began again. The company closed the project within a week. The tapes were sent to a laboratory in Cleveland and never returned. Now, over a century since the night had vanished, the train's timetable still hangs in the Athens Historical Museum. Visitors walk past it without notice, but every February the date 1901 darkens slightly, as if someone had just printed it anew. The curator changes the lighting, polishes the glass, but the ink persists. Scholars continue to search for explanations, faulty records, shared delusions, magnetic fields. Yet there remains one detail they cannot erase. Every witness who heard the phantom whistle described the same hour. 9:17, always. No variation. A mathematician once calculated that, if the train had kept moving at its recorded speed from the moment it entered the tunnel until now, circling in an unseen loop, it would have traveled more than 1,000,000 miles. An absurd number, perhaps, but then he noted something else. 1,000,000 miles at that speed would equal precisely 1 century of continuous motion. When he presented the paper, the lights in the lecture hall flickered and went out. Some believe, no, 47 was not taken but preserved, that it exists in a fold of time, running endlessly between departure and arrival, carrying its passengers through an unfinished hour. They say the 12th soul aboard is always awake, counting the turns of the wheels. And when the clock outside the world finally strikes 9:18, the train will stop. And whatever waits within will step off. Others insist the valley itself is cursed, that the tunnel opened into a chamber older than the earth, where sound travels, but light cannot. They say the conductor made a bargain in the dark to keep moving rather than return. But a few, the oldest families of Athens, whisper that the train still seeks the station, guided by habit more than hope. Each winter it draws closer, seen in fog, heard in the frozen soil. Almost home but never quite. They keep their lamps burning in February. Not out of fear, but courtesy. The newest caretakers of the museum tell one last story. On the night of February 12th each year, the security camera aimed at the old ledger records a brief distortion, a line of light passing across the frame. The timestamp always freezes at 9:17, when the footage is replayed in slow motion. The reflection of the glass case shows a small scene, a station, a man with a lantern, and a train gliding soundlessly into view. The whistle cannot be heard, yet every listener swears they feel it in their bones. No one knows what became of the 12th passenger list, the one with 13 names. Some think it lies sealed in a box under the tunnel. Some say it is hidden within the ledger itself. Written in ink only the dead can read. But if you ever visit Athens in winter and find yourself near the valley at night, you may hear a low wind moving along the old track bed. It will sound almost like speech, the syllables broken but insistent, repeating the same pattern. If you listen too long, you might begin to recognize your own name among them, and when the wind falls silent, there will come a pause still, breathless, and then the distant call of a whistle from the dark hills. It will mark the hour. 9:17 every year. On time, the valley never forgot the sound. Even now, when the wind drags through the pines, it finds the old cut of the Midland line and sings through it. A low metallic sigh that the people of Athens can no longer tell from memory. They say the earth there still hums when frost hardens the soil, an echo of a train that never stopped moving. The place is ordinary in daylight. Ferns crawl where sleepers once lay, and deer cross the clearing without fear. But when evening falls, the air grows heavy, as though the land itself is listening. Travelers who camp near the old grade speak of dreams that come in cycles. First the whistle, then the tunnel, then the faces in the glass. Always 12. Always waiting. In the winter of 1996, a road surveyor named Martin Keyes was sent to chart the overgrown corridor for a potential hiking trail. He laughed at the ghost stories and came alone. His last radio transmission was made at 5 p.m., calm and routine. By morning, his truck was still parked by the tree line, the door open, headlights burning. Inside lay his map case, soaked with dew. The last line he drew before vanishing read, in pencil, "Sound approaching, not thunder." Searchers found his footprints following the curve of the vanished track straight toward the sealed mouth of the tunnel. They ended cleanly at the concrete wall. There were no signs of a struggle, no drag marks, nothing but 12 small stones arranged in a perfect circle at the base. When the sheriff scattered them, the radio on his hip let out a single burst of static 3 short notes. drawn together like a whistle call that no one else was sent to finish the survey. By the turn of the millennium, the story of No 47 had drifted into folklore podcasts and late-night television. Hosts made jokes about the world's most punctual ghost, playing scratchy clips of the whistle. Yet those who lived near Athens noticed something the outsiders did not. The jokes always stopped after the broadcast. Stations lost signal for exactly 1 minute at 9:17 p.m. Viewers called in to report that their screens, filled with gray static streaked by a line of light, running west to east. A technician once slowed the footage frame by frame. In the static he saw windows, 12 of them, each showing a faint silhouette seated in stillness. When he reversed the tape, the silhouettes turned their heads. He resigned the next day. Around 2008, a storm ripped open a section of the old riverbank south of town. The flood exposed what appeared to be timbers from a collapsed trestle. Among them, volunteers found a metal plate, unmarked except for the number 47 stamped deep into its face. The plate was taken to the county museum and placed beside the ledger exhibit. On the night it arrived, the museum alarm triggered 3 times, though the doors remained locked. The curator found the glass of the ledger case fogged from within. When he wiped it clear, he saw faint writing on the inside surface of the glass itself, traced by condensation, "All aboard." The writing faded within minutes, leaving only his reflection. He tried not to return after dusk. As the century turned, the world forgot how to believe in hauntings. But the valley kept its rituals. Each February, the families who still lived near the line lit lanterns in their windows. They did not call it a vigil, only the keeping of the hour. Children asked what it meant, and the elders would answer. Courtesy for travelers. Nothing more. Once every decade or so, someone new would move into town and ask about the whistle. The townsfolk would shrug and say it was the echo of freight lines from the next county, though no freight had run there in generations. Outsiders stopped asking eventually. Still, every February 12th at 9:17, the street lamps flicker, and a pulse runs through the ground, a heartbeat rather than a tremor. The dogs whine. The air smells faintly of coal. Then it passes, leaving behind only silence so deep it feels hollow. In 2014, a graduate student researching Appalachian folklore discovered a reel-to-reel tape misfiled in the university archives. Its label read Athens Field Log 1901. Porter. The date was impossible. Magnetic tape would not exist for half a century, but curiosity won. When played, the reel produced a faint hum followed by a man's voice, dry and deliberate. Archivists identified the cadence as early 20th century Appalachian. The voice said, "Train number 47 departed Athens Station 7:32 p.m. clear weather. 12 aboard." "I see them still." Then a pause and softer, "Return pending." The reel broke before the second playback. No one could determine how it had been recorded. By 2017, the town tried to turn its legend into commerce. A tourism board announced the Ghost Rail Festival, promising lantern tours and folk music nights. Posters went up bearing a stylized image of a train disappearing into mist. On opening night, crowds gathered near the field where the old tracks ended. Vendors sold paper whistles. At 9 o'clock, the mayor gave a cheerful speech about embracing history. At 9:15, the PA system cut out. At 9:17, a sound rolled through the valley, low, rising, unmistakable. The lights along the field dimmed to embers. Phones lost service. Children began to cry. No one moved for nearly a minute. Then the sound faded and everything came back to life. The festival closed before dawn. No one tried again. That same night, the digital clock in the sheriff's office reset itself to 9:17 and refused to advance for an hour. Older residents say the town lives in 2 hours now. The one the world keeps and the one the valley remembers. The first is ordinary. The second belongs to the train. Between them lies the minute that never ends. Every few years, someone swears they see the headlight in the fog. A truck driver crossing the ridge glances down and catches a glow sliding under the trees. A hiker camping by the river wakes to find rails pressed into the mud beside his tent. They tell their stories once, then grow quiet, ashamed of belief. But the stories always return. In 2020, a researcher named Dr. Althea Gunn published a paper arguing that the phenomenon surrounding Athens corresponded with rare electromagnetic harmonics produced by old iron seams underground. She visited the site with instruments and sensors, recording subtle vibrations exactly at 9:17 p.m. Her final field note read, "Pulse increasing, sounds like engines in distance, hear 12 beats, then pause." Her colleagues found the sensors still running the next morning. She was gone. The audio logs contained 12 steady knocks, then a hiss, and finally a man's voice murmuring, "Tickets, please." Now the valley is fenced, posted against trespassers, but fences cannot keep out sound. On cold nights, motorists on Route 33 report the glare of a lantern pacing their cars, keeping speed beside them until they cross the county line. Their dashboards flicker. Their radios fill with static threaded by a faint rhythm, 3 long, 1 short, the old code for arrival. Those who stop to listen say it isn't frightening. It feels like homesickness. And so the story circles back to the beginning. The year, the place, the hour, all remain fixed like the hands of a broken clock. Every generation adds its own witness, its own variation, yet the center never changes. A train left Athens in 1901 and was never found. Its whistle still moves through the hills. Its passengers still wait for the station that burned down long ago. Some nights the wind brings the faint scent of smoke and iron. If you follow it, you might reach the old platform, nothing more than splinters and frost. Stand there long enough, and you will feel the ground tighten beneath your feet, as though the earth were drawing breath. Then a shimmer will cross the valley, light without source, sound without echo. You might think you see a shape in the fog, a line of windows, each holding a pale figure staring straight ahead. They will not look at you. They will not move. When the whistle calls, they will vanish into the dark, still bound to the minute between 7:32 and 9:17, forever traveling the distance that no longer exists. If you hear the whistle, step back from the rail. Do not answer. The line remains open, and it remembers names. It is courteous to travelers, but it does not give them back. Some say that when the world finally stops turning for a single second, when every clock on earth holds its breath, the valley will open once more. The tunnel will breathe out its cargo, and the passengers of No. 47 will step into a world that has forgotten them. The first will carry a lantern, the second a Bible, the third a bag of schoolbooks. The last will raise his watch to the dim sky, see that it still marks 9:17, and whisper with relief, "On time." And the rails will ring again. Until then, the hills keep their silence, and the wind keeps the tune. The train that never arrived continues on its endless route, each wheel a heartbeat, each whistle a prayer, sliding forever between the dark and the dawn.